So, Mike, would you come up? We got a short video clip of Mike here. Some of you guys may recognize this from news during Harvey when the storm first hit. There was a nursing home in Port Arthur, right? Nursing home in Port Arthur, and Mike was instrumental in getting a lot of people out of that nursing home. You'll get to see the footage, and then we'll hear the story from Mike. So hold on just for a second.
We're inside right now, and they are evacuating these patients. This is a very dire and sensitive situation, guys.
On live TV, we witnessed the Lake Arthur nursing home in peril. A frantic evacuation underway.
I could not believe they were still here. So I waded through the water, and somebody gave me a ride on the boat down here. It just broke my heart.
Tensions high, the biohazardous floodwater just inches from those who were bedridden, others in wheelchairs, soaked. Nearly 100 critical patients at the mercy of first responders.
There's no way in or out of this facility unless it's a boat.
Amid the chaos, we met Port Arthur Police Detective Mike Hebert. He told us how he had to intervene.
When we got in here, there had been some altercations.
He said some patients were in the contaminated water for more than a day.
Those are still the trailer and the truck ruts as they launched their boats.
Now, more than 2 months later, we meet him again outside of that same nursing home.
They weren't allowed to be taken out, and I think that's where a lot of the altercations were coming from.
Detective Hebert told us a criminal investigation now underway. At the center, the nursing home director, Jeff Rosetta, accused in a search warrant of criminal negligence and recklessness.
We knew very quickly that he was not going to be any help in this situation, and he became aggressive, and that's why he was put in handcuffs.
Hebert said with Rosetta out of the way, the evacuation could finally begin. Outside, boats were lined up. One by one, those critical patients, still in their wheelchairs and beds, were loaded in.
What was that feeling like when you finally left those doors and all those residents were out?
It was an amazing feeling at that time.
But it wasn't over. Blocks away, at the Port Arthur Little Theater, each patient triaged, while yards away, the Army Reserve staged a medical air evacuation. Black Hawk and Chinook helicopters called in. For 8 hours, they airlifted 160 patients to nursing homes north of Houston.
Every day I come through here, I think about what happened that day.
The experience still haunts him, but he says he tries to focus on what the flood couldn't wash away, the heart of humanity.
It meant a whole lot.
That hero detective still giving, helping Port Arthur residents like Cherry Johnson rebuild her home. It's all she has.
They have been by my side every step of the way, and I love each and every one of them, especially Mike. He has been there for me to make sure everything was okay with me.
In Port Arthur, Foti Kalergis, 13 Eyewitness News.
I want to tell you guys, that was one of the most dynamic speakers I've ever heard before me, and obviously I've got to follow up from this guy, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me, man. I'm just a street cop, you know? So I'm going to try to pass a message on to you guys that just really resonates with me, not only as a policeman or a peace officer, but as a Catholic. I was born and raised a Catholic. I know that my mother and father raised me right. I grew up across the street from the Catholic Church, St. E's in Port Neches, and the church raised me right. I know that somebody had earlier this morning, they had the veterans stand up. And veterans to me, they're my heroes, because my father was my hero. And my father taught me what real heroes were. And having served in World War II in the South Pacific, and having my uncle who was killed in the Aleutian Islands, they would always talk to me about those heroes. I know Ed Skeeters, my brother-in-law, if I'm not mistaken, Ed, your father was a bomber pilot in the European theater. So I applaud all you guys for the service that you did for your country. And that always, it taught me a lesson. My father and my mother always taught me lessons, but the church and my catechism classes taught me lessons too. I didn't realize till later on in life that being a cop, being a police officer, it was a calling. I initially thought, man, I did a ride along with HPD in one of my criminal justice classes, and I got hooked, and it was the most exciting 8 hours I'd ever spent in my life. And little did I know that I thought the job was really about me at that time. Now I know that it was a calling from God that put me in this job. Now, to go back to what happened on Hurricane Harvey, it's, for me, I may stutter and stammer through this thing because it's so emotional for me, and I usually don't get emotional on things like this because as a 29 veteran year cop, last 10 years as a gang investigator, things just don't bother me anymore. But this one bothered me. This bothered, I think, everybody that took part in the evacuations of that day. It bothered them too. My morning started, I think it was August 29th, which would have been a Wednesday morning. And one of my partners, who actually was a narcotics officer, I couldn't get out of my neighborhood in Port Neches, is where I live. Detective Arvizo had a city truck, and I'd already sunk my truck that night, so I knew I couldn't get out. Paul came and was able to get into my neighborhood and get me. It was about 6 a.m. when we finally got over the railroad tracks into Port Arthur. And your first thought as a cop is you have to get to your command center. That's where you have to go. Our comms were down. We didn't know what was going on throughout the city. It was absolute chaos, just absolute chaos. So Paul and I just said, we've got to get to the command center. We hoped there was a command center, and if it was, it would be at the station downtown. Well, we tried 4 or 5 different ways to get downtown. There was no way to get there. We ended up back at Jimmy Johnson in Twin City, which is a very short distance, probably about a mile from that nursing home. And if you understand what Port Arthur is a bowl, kind of like New Orleans. The levees, the seawalls, the pumps, they're supposed to keep all the water out. Well, about 2 o'clock that morning, the pumps ran out of gas. The game was over at that point. So as we stood on Twin City Highway and looked out over this Lake Arthur addition, it was about 6 foot of water, and it was a lake. And we noticed that 2 boats were launching. And I remember telling Paul, God wants us here. This is where he's putting us. Let's go. So we get out of our truck. We get out of Paul's truck. We have our things in our bags. We stopped one of the boats to say, hey, y'all hang on. We're going to get in with y'all and just start going from there. And at that point, a boat came in with a elderly woman. She was a heavy-set woman. She was absolutely exhausted from the flooding. She was having trouble breathing. We get her out of the boat. Paul just said, look, man, put her in my truck. I've got to get her somewhere. We know the one hospital we have in the city is already flooded in. There's no way he's going to make it there. So he's thinking he's going to have to somehow drive to Beaumont because the guys that are launching said they came through Beaumont, so there was a way. So we put the woman in Paul's truck, and I said, look, dude, I'm just going to stay here because there's more boats showing up to launch. So I said, I'm going to try to do something here. And Paul starts to drive off with this woman, and I will never forget him stopping that truck and rolling his window down and saying, hey, Mike, good luck, because I knew I wasn't going to see him again. And it's an eerie feeling for me because during Hurricane Ike and Rita, I was with about a 4 or 5 man team, and that's how we went everywhere, was in teams. And the last team during Ike, they were all Catholics. We all grew up together. We all went to the same school together. It was you knew they had your back. And even in Hurricane Rita, it was the same way. You knew these officers had your back. Well, during Hurricane Harvey, here I stand at Twin City and Jimmy Johnson, and I'm by myself. And at the time, at the rush of getting this woman into this truck, Paul has taken all my equipment. I've got a pistol, and I've got a radio. That's the one thing that I grabbed. Everything else went with Detective Arvizo. So at that point, I end up getting in a boat, and the water rescue start. Is there any guys here that performed water rescues during Hurricane Harvey? Have several. Being a gang officer is just about violence. That's all it's about. So I'd never performed something like this, and these guys can probably attest to it. One of the most amazing feelings in the world is when I'm not an outdoorsman. I was with what people refer to as coonasses and rednecks, right? But these guys were outdoorsmen. They knew that water. I didn't know. I don't own a boat, but I was there. But these guys were amazing. I mean, they were just amazing. So as we began these rescues went on for several hours, and you could see the shock of the people's face. It was horrible, especially for the children. People were just traumatized because this thing had went on all night long. They didn't know where this water was going to stop. We didn't know where the water was going to stop. We didn't know, at the time it was still raining, we didn't know what kind of cell was going to come over us and just completely drowned our city. So at one point, we went back, and a quick story, a byline of this, is when we went back, we were dropping people off back at Jimmy Johnson in Twin City because that was only high ground, and they were expecting rescue teams, ambulances. There was nothing there. These people were just dropped off. That was it. That's all we could do for them. And as we dropped these people off, there was a young man. By this time, though, that was the first time I heard the word Cajun Navy. Didn't have a clue who these people were, but they literally had their own comms. They were, our 911 had went down hours before, but these Cajun Navy people had their own app, and they were getting these rescue texts, and that's why they were showing up at Jimmy Johnson in Twin City. Pretty amazing group of people, I can tell you that. If you noticed on the water, I talk about the coonasses and the rednecks, there wasn't many people of color on the water. These were pretty much all white men doing these rescues. And as we got out, I was in full uniform, and there was a young African-American man that came up. Initially, I thought he was a teenager. And he comes up to me, and he says, "Officer, I came all the way from Arkansas. I drove to Houston. They said they don't need help. I watched the Weather Channel, and I came to Port Arthur, Texas." And I thought that was amazing that this young kid had come all the way from Arkansas. So I told him, I said, "Hey, look, I'm going to get you, some of our locals were there at that time. I'm going to get you in a boat, and you can start helping." He said, "No, you don't understand. I went and bought a boat. I had it rigged out. I've pulled it here. I want to help." Now, the night before the storm, as me and my wife were watching TV, and I remember watching EWTN, which I love EWTN. I find a lot of great shows on EWTN. And I don't remember if it was a priest that said it, but they told a story about a man who was in a catastrophic situation. And he points his finger up at God and he says, "God, why are you letting this happen? Why don't you do something?" And God looks back at the man and says, "I did do something. I created you." So when that young man came up to me, that was my first thought in my mind. This kid found the calling. This is why he came here. So he gets in his boat. The locals help him launch. He's going to follow a local guy, and he's in the boat by himself. And as he starts to pull off, I yell, "David!" And he turns around, and I said, "Are you Catholic?" He turns around, got that funny look on his face. He said, "No." I said, "Well, you should be." So as we progress on water rescues, some of the water has receded a little bit, and there's we call it it's just a bridge. It's really just an overpass right there where people would have to pick their boats up, go around, and get back into the neighborhood where this nursing home is. And that's where I met the enemy for the first time. And the enemy, which I didn't know that fire ant mounds could float. I had no clue whatsoever. I'm not an outdoorsman, guys. I like fishing from a pier. But let me tell you something. When that fire ant mound met my crotch, that was one of the most vicious things I've ever experienced in my life. And that's a very poignant thing to have happen. So as I waited off behind a house, told my guys to hang on, got all my equipment off, and just seeing these bites all over it was just vicious. But that wasn't the worst. That wasn't the worst thing. So as we got back into the boat and we began to go, we were stopped. And that's when a man comes up and says, "Are you a Port Arthur police officer?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am." He said, "Man, there's a nursing home just down the street, and all hell's breaking loose," were his exact words. So I said, "Okay, let's go to it." So as we go to it, and we pull up in front of the nursing home, what's the first thing a cop does? Grabs his radio, right? Got to tell dispatch, hopefully somebody's out there. I reach for my radio's gone. And the Cajun guy that I'm with, he says, partner, I hate to tell you this, and I didn't want to tell you this, but, and this is his exact words, when those fire ants invaded your privates, I saw your radio go spinning and with a big kerplunk. And he said, I didn't have the heart to tell you. So here I am at the foot of this nursing home, and the guy that brought us there, as I get out of the boat and wait to the front door, I turn around and look at him, and I said, and I do my hands, and he said, I'm not going back in there. So as I walk in, you have to understand the sight that you see when you walk into this place. Now, before we got there, he had told me the nurses have abandoned the nursing home. The staff has abandoned the nursing home. So you go in, you see these beds of these people, and my first thought is they've already passed away because they're not moving. I don't see any breath. And it's like you see in the movies where that hallway, when a guy will be in the hallway, just shoots down, right? And it just seems like this hallway is a mile long. And for 29 years as a cop, things don't fluster me anymore, but this flustered me, guys. This shook me up to my very core of what I was seeing, knowing that I didn't have my cell phone and I didn't have a radio, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. In my mind, the staff had abandoned these people. So as I waited in, I came across a nurse who had a cell phone, and I asked her what happened, and she couldn't even talk. Now, I look back now and understand that she was in shock from having been in that nursing home for 48 hours and not knowing what was going to happen. I took her phone, started calling 911, every number I could find. 911 was bouncing me all over Jefferson County, but not to the Port Arthur Police Department. So I've panicked one other time in my life, and when I did panic, I said a prayer. So that was the first prayer that I said, was to God, I don't know what's going to happen, but you've got to get me through this thing. You've got to get me some help. And that was pretty much this quick, short prayer I said. All of a sudden, I see a light at the end of the hall. Come to find out, a news crew has already come to this nursing home. And I'm thinking to myself, you've got to be kidding me. I can't find a cop or a fireman anywhere, but there's a news crew in this nursing home. So as I go up, what you don't see on here is the video of when I come up to this news crew. And my only thought is, I have to let somebody know that we're here. And I don't know what came out of my mouth. It was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. I know that because I've seen the videos since. And I'm glad these guys didn't show it here. So anyway, I get on, I start to talk, tell if anybody is out there that can get into the Port Arthur Fire Department, Port Arthur Police Department, please tell them that we need help here. And about that time, one of our young officers walks in, and he walks up to me, and he's as shocked as I am. And he says, where's your radio? And I said, man, I lost it. And I said, we're critical situation here. And then, you see that camera guy move in, and then we push the camera away, and we go, and we discuss what we're going to try to do. And some of the things that happen in this nursing home, I can't say because we have a criminal investigation going on, and there are civil lawsuits now for all the families. But when I do, I will tell you this, when I do make it in to the executive director's office, I can tell you that he's been beat up. I mean, severely beat up. And he's sitting at his desk, and he's just staring at his desk. And I come in, and I say, I'm Detective Mike Hebert of the Port Arthur Police Department. Man, I'm here to help you. I'm here to, let's get a plan together. And he looks up with this face, and I can see the whelps all over his face. And about that time, a woman comes in, and it's one of her mother is in this nursing home. And this woman just goes off. I mean, and my first thought is, this isn't their first confrontation. And my first thought is, man, she beat this guy up. She was so angry. And I've told this story before that I've never seen somebody so angry where their blood vessels burst in their eyes. Because this woman, I know now what she went through to get to that nursing home. And she walked a mile in chest-deep water to get to her mother. And she was so angry because she felt she had been lied to by the staff of the nursing home when she would call in. They were saying, everything's fine, don't panic, we're all high and dry. So at that point, I get her out of the room. I again walk back in and tell this guy, hey, I'm here to help you. And he looks up and he says, where's your badge? Well, I'm wearing a full uniform, guys. I've got my badge on my chest. I said, dude, it's on my chest. And he was like, fake badge. You're a fake cop. Get out of my office and get off my property. Now, he didn't say it in exactly those words, I promise you. So I thought, okay, plan B. Plan B's in effect. Walked out, don't even know what plan B is. Walked down the hall, come across another administrator. They ended up putting me in contact with Texas Task Force 1, thank God, and was able to get on the phone with a captain of the Beaumont Fire Department who's liaison with this task force. And I asked him, I said, hey, do you guys have a plan here? He says, yes, we have a plan. You tell me where those people are going to go, because I'd already told him we're getting these people out. Now, if you understand, the sewer has backed up into this nursing home, and it's been like that for 12 hours. So you're standing in calf-deep human waste is all it is, and the smell is atrocious. And so I told him, I said, David, I'm going to get these people out of here, but if your people aren't there, we're going to be indicted for this. And I truly believe that if we put these people on this boat and these administrators are not on board with this, and we get to that extract point and you're not there, I don't know what we're going to do. And he promised me, we will be there, I promise you. So the volunteers come in. I go out to speak with the volunteers who, by the way, are extremely upset by now. These Cajun Navy guys, these are hard people. These are outdoorsmen, and they are infuriated with what's going on inside this nursing home because one of them had seen it before. There were several ex-New Orleans guys there. So they had seen the devastation and what happened in the nursing homes in New Orleans. And they were very vocal to me, and we got a plan together. There was some professional fire rescue guys, water rescue guys from all over the country, Mississippi, Alabama, North Texas. So I felt comfortable with the team that we had put together, and we got a chaotic, orderly evacuation done. And as we placed these people on the boats, my thought was, if one of these boats flips, my mind just raced and raced and raced. And thank God we didn't lose anybody. Now, I can't, everybody also always wants to talk about how many died in the nursing home, how many died afterwards. And that's really a number that we don't even know what happened. We've talked to relatives. Every time I go do an interview, as the lead detective on this case, every time I go to do an interview, everything floods back with these people. They haven't forgot about it. We've even been able to interview some of the patients, and one of the first interviews we did was with Mr. Davis. And after the interview was over, he was wheelchair bound, and he told us, he was very articulate in what happened throughout the night in that nursing home. But at the end of our statements, we always say, do you have anything to add? Is there anything that really hurt you? And when we say that, we mean physically. And Mr. Davis, who is a World War II veteran, by the way, makes the comment, he says, you know what hurt me the most was I lost my dignity in that nursing home because I crapped my pants in front of a bunch of women. So those are the types of things that Mr. Davis told us what was going on in that nursing home. Dignity went out the window in that nursing home. About 4 or 5 years prior, my father was in that same nursing home when he had broken his hip. So it was very real to me what was going on in there. And when you interview these family members and how angry they still are. But I tell you, for me, it was all about faith that got me through that whole thing. I don't know where I would be without God. I don't know where I'd be without the Catholic Church. It's just amazing to me. Those Cajun Navy guys, these Cajun Army guys, these guys I didn't know who I consider good friends now. These are amazing human beings. I told you earlier about, you know, God pointing and saying, man, I made you. That's it. That's the calling, guys. That's the calling for me. I know now at 29 years, that was my calling. Technically, I was not supposed to be at that nursing home because 8 weeks prior, I had prayed and prayed and prayed that I wanted out of law enforcement. I was done with it. I was done with it all. If I never see another autopsy as long as I live, I don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. And I'd prayed for months, please send me in a different direction. I get a phone call out of the blue it was a job offer, just out of the blue. Now, this was my dream job when I retired at 34 years. In 5 years, this is the job I want, and it's over the Criminal Justice Department at one of the local high schools, my alma mater at Port Neches Groves. Superintendent's on the phone saying, do you want this job? And I was stunned. I didn't know the job was open. He said, we had a nationwide search. We had 67 applicants. We didn't like anybody we got. Somebody said, this was your dream job. Do you want it? I said, well, don't you want to do an interview? Well, we can do one. You can come on down here. We'll do the interview. But the job's yours if you want it. And this was on a Friday. I went down. I toured the school. Man, I went into the Criminal Justice Department. I had my own bathroom. I got my own locker room. I have my own parking space out front of the high school. I get summers off. It was over. I was done for me. Monday morning, I went to the city of Port Arthur. I filled out all my retirement stuff. I typed my letter up. I was keeping it a cute little secret because I was just going to drop that bomb on him like everybody else does to say, I'm out of here. I told the superintendent, give me till Friday to get everything straight. I talked to a financial planner. Wednesday night, so I got the job offer on Friday. Wednesday came around. Probably 3 in the morning, I woke up with what I can describe as an anxiety attack, saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, my wife had just got through with her, she had stage 3 breast cancer, and she had just got through with her treatments. And it was just, man, I couldn't even breathe. God had a plan. It wasn't my plan, it was his plan. I wanted out. I know now that I was at that nursing home for a reason. Because if I would have took that job, I would have never been there. I also know from investigation that other law enforcement agencies went to those nursing homes and left because they didn't know what to do. They weren't Port Arthur officers. We had officers coming in from all over the place. And that's shocked me. Shocked. But not judgmental. But when these administrators are telling these officers everything's fine, National Guard's on its way. Oh, they must have a plan. National Guard showed up the next day. There's a plan for each and every one of us that I've learned through this experience. I will probably retire as a Port Arthur police officer now, I know. I don't go looking for other jobs anymore. This is my calling. This is where I am. As much as I want to be somewhere else, God wants me there. And at 54 years old, 29 years in law enforcement, I just realized it. So I'm very humbled to stand before you guys. I'm not going to try to make myself out to be something I'm not. There's 2 things I know. I'm going to pay an exorbitant amount of money to the United States government this year for taxes, and I will sin tomorrow. It's just who I am. As a Catholic, sin has always burdened me. It doesn't burden me anymore because of my Acts retreat. That retreat changed my life. I learned to lay those sins at the foot of the cross and walk away from them. Every good Catholic has that burden. Every good old school Catholic just feels the weight of those sin on your shoulders because that's how we're raised. But Acts changed my life. I tell people, if you haven't been to an Acts retreat, it's like a boot camp. Acts retreat didn't save me by any means. It's like a boot camp. It just trained me for the next phase of my life. So I want to thank you guys for having me up here. I've loved every minute that I've been here. Thank you very much.